7 months after Garrett Cohn walked into a Flagstaff shoe store and didn't buy a single thing, the store manager still kept the security footage, not because anyone asked him to, because he needed to remember what he saw. There was a girl, 8 years old, standing in the children's aisle in socks, her own shoes set neatly on the shelf beside a pair of boys' sneakers 2 sizes too big for her feet. She had traded them, her shoes for her brother's, placed them on the display rack like a transaction she expected no one to honor. Everyone in that store thought they knew what that moment was. They thought it was sad. They thought it was an inconvenience. They thought it was somebody else's responsibility. Nobody thought it was about to bring 400 riders down from the high desert like a slow red wall. The reason nobody was ready for was the simplest possible thing. And it had been sitting on that shelf for 11 minutes before Garrett Cohn walked through the door. November light fell flat and gray across the Flagstaff Basin that morning, the sun barely cresting the San Francisco peaks before it gave up and hid behind a ceiling of milkweed cloud. The temperature had dropped to 28 overnight, and it sat at 31 when Garrett Cohn swung his leg off his Road King at 7:46 in the parking lot of a strip mall on Milton Road. His breath came out white and was gone. He was 54 years old, 231 pounds, with a gray threaded beard that reached the third button of his flannel shirt, and hands so scarred along the knuckles from 20 years of engine work that the skin there looked like old leather restitched by a man who didn't care about the seams. He was the president of the Ash Creek Riders. He had been the president for 11 of the club's 14 years of existence, and he was the last of the 6 founding members still in the saddle. The other 5 had peeled off for various reasons over the years, reasons he kept in a mental ledger he never read aloud to anyone. He wore the club's patch on a cut that had been resold at the collar twice. He was not handsome. Nobody had ever called him handsome, and nobody ever would. What people called him, when they called him anything at all, was Cohn, the way you name a landmark, not a person. He had stopped at this strip mall for a tube of bearing grease and a box of disposable gloves from the hardware store at the far end. The shoe store was 2 doors down from it, wedged between a vaping shop and a laundromat, with a hand-lettered sign in its window. He had no reason to enter a shoe store. He hadn't entered one voluntarily in 4 years, not since the last time, not since a reason he kept as locked as the ledger. He pulled his collar up and walked toward the hardware store. He passed the shoe store's glass front, and then he stopped. The girl was standing in the aisle visible from the window, in her socks, holding a pair of boys' sneakers against her chest with both arms, the way you hold something you are afraid someone will take back. She was small. Not 6 small, just 8 years old in November small, wearing a green jacket with a broken zipper held shut by a safety pin the size of a finger. Her hair was in a single braid that had come half undone. She was not crying. That was the part that stopped Garrett Cohn's feet on the sidewalk. She was not crying, and she was not calling for anyone, and she was not looking at the door. She was looking at the shelf, where she had placed her own shoes. 2 pink sneakers with Velcro straps, arranged side by side as deliberately as a museum exhibit. She was waiting for something. What? He could not have said. He stood outside the glass for 4 seconds. Then he went in. The store smelled of rubber soles and forced air heat. A teenager in a red polo shirt stood behind the register looking at his phone. 2 other customers, a woman with a stroller and an older man in a canvas coat, stood at the far wall and watched the girl with the particular stillness of people who have decided the situation is not theirs. Garrett Cohn walked directly to the children's aisle. He stopped 2 feet from the girl. She looked up at him. He was an enormous man to be standing that close to an 8-year-old, and she measured him from boots to beard without flinching, the way children sometimes do when they have already used up their fear on something else. He lowered himself to one knee on the linoleum floor. He had a bad right knee, had had it for 6 years, and it took him a moment. He said nothing while he settled. Then he said, "Who are those for?" It was not a question. Or it was. But he said it the way you state a heading at the top of a page, calm and certain it will be answered. She looked at the sneakers against her chest. She said, "My brother, he doesn't have any." She paused. She said, "His feet are cold at recess." Garrett Coln looked at her socked feet. He looked at the pink shoes on the shelf. He looked at the boy's sneakers she was holding. He said, "What size is he?" She said, 4. He said, "How old?" She said, 6. He said, "What's his name?" She said, "Tommy." Then she looked at Garrett Coln, the way an 8-year-old looks at someone when she has answered all the questions and is waiting to find out if it mattered. He put one hand flat on his knee, pushed himself upright, and turned toward the register. He said, "I'm going to need someone to bring me every size 4 they have in boys, and I'm going to need her original shoes back in a bag." The teenager set his phone face down. The woman with the stroller turned around. The older man in the canvas coat stopped pretending to look at insoles. The girl watched Garrett Coln's back from the aisle, with her arms still locked around the sneakers she had not yet put down. She did not put them down. Not yet. She was still waiting to be sure. The teenager brought 3 boxes of boys' size 4. Garrett Coln opened each one on the floor of the aisle, not at the bench, because his knee would not take another descent, and he held each option out for the girl to look at. She studied them the way a contractor studies bids. She pointed to the middle pair, gray with a green stripe, with laces instead of Velcro. He said, "He can tie his own laces now." Coln set the other 2 boxes aside and carried the gray ones to the register, along with the pink shoes the teenager had retrieved from the shelf. He paid. Cash. $47 for the boys' shoes, $22 for the girls. Total, $69 without hesitation or arithmetic. He tucked the girl's shoes into the bag first, set the bag at her feet. He looked at her. He said, "Put yours on." She put her shoes on. She worked the Velcro tabs with the efficiency of someone who has dressed herself for a long time. She stood up. She looked at the bag with Tommy's shoes in it. Garrett Coln crouched, slowly, and looped the bag's handle over her wrist so it hung there like a small lantern. He said, "Does somebody know where you are?" She said, "My mom. She's at the laundromat." He stood. He said, "Go give those to your mom to hold." She said, "She doesn't have any money left." He said, "I know. These are already paid for. Go." She went. She crossed the store, pushed the glass door open with her shoulder, and disappeared in the direction of the laundromat. Garrett Coln stood at the register for a moment. He watched the glass door stop swinging. He picked up his receipt, folded it once, and put it in the inside breast pocket of his cut, where he kept things he didn't want to lose. Then he walked back out into the November cold and into the hardware store and bought his bearing grease and his gloves and rode back to Ash Creek. He did not tell anyone that evening. He rode back along Route 89 with the peaks behind him and the scrub flat on either side and the cold working in through the collar of his flannel, and he ran the arithmetic of what he had seen, not the $69. He didn't care about the $69. He ran the arithmetic of a girl who had solved a problem that was too big for her with the only currency she had, which was herself, and who had then stood in her socks on a commercial linoleum floor and waited, as though some part of her believed the world had one more move to make. He had grown up with a sister. He had grown up watching a woman who solved problems that way. He did not let himself think the next thought all the way to the end, because the next thought had a name on it, and the name was not one he could open in a parking lot on a Tuesday. He stored it the way he stored the other things. He went home. He ate standing over the sink. He did not sleep well. He told Reyes in the morning. Diego Reyes was the club's sergeant-at-arms, 48 years old, with a shaved head and a scar that ran from his left ear to his jaw from a highway accident in 2009. And he was the second person Garrett Coln trusted with anything that mattered. They were in the Ash Creek Chapter House, a converted auto body shop off the 89A, with the overhead door half raised and a propane heater breathing at the workbench. Coln set a coffee down in front of Reyes and told him what he had seen. Plain, in order, no flourishes. Reyes listened without interrupting, which was his default. When Coln finished, Reyes looked at his coffee. He said, "You get a name." Coln said, "The girl gave me her brother's first name, Tommy, no last name. Mother was at the laundromat on Milton, the one across from the strip mall." Reyes said, "You know if they're housed." Coln said, "I don't know anything. I know the girl was dressed for the weather. Jacket was old but functional. She didn't have the look." He paused. "But the shoes were worn through, both of them. Pink pair and whatever the kid had been wearing before. Kid had been wearing something through to nothing and she knew it." Reyes was quiet for a moment. He said, "You want me to find them?" Coln said, "I want you to find out what's actually going on before we do anything, not after." Reyes nodded once. He pulled out his phone. It took Reyes 4 hours. He had a contact at a social services office in Flagstaff, a woman named Deb Ochoa who had worked intake for 11 years and who trusted Reyes to use information the way it was supposed to be used, carefully and without wreckage. He called her, described what Coln had seen, gave her the laundromat location and the time and the children's names as he had them. Deb Ochoa said she would make some calls. She called back in 90 minutes. She said, "I think I know who you're talking about. Single mother, 2 kids. Girl named Isla, boy named Tommy. They're in a transitional housing unit on Cedar, the one managed by Refuge North. They moved in 6 weeks ago. Before that, they were in a car for 3 weeks." Reyes wrote nothing down. He kept it in his head because he was built that way. He said, "Is there a file?" Deb said, "There's a file. Nothing active. The mother, Verna Pease. She came in voluntarily 2 months ago to establish the kids with the county. Clean record, no flags. She's working a breakfast shift at a diner on Route 66 and trying to get the second job." Reyes said, "What do they need?" Deb Ochoa was quiet for a moment. She said, "What they need is winter. It's going to snow on Thursday." Reyes said, "I understand." He said, "Thank you, Deb." She said, "You didn't call me." He said, "I never do." He ended the call and walked back to where Garrett Coln was standing at the workbench with a carburetor opened in front of him like a patient on a table. Coln listened. He did not look up from the carburetor while Reyes talked. When Reyes finished, Coln set down his wrench. He stood there for a moment with both hands resting on the bench, not quite still, the way a person stands when they are running a very large number through a very small channel. He said, "How many we got within 100 miles right now?" Reyes already knew. He said, "Flagstaff Chapter 18, Camp Verde 12, Prescott 22. We call the Phoenix affiliate and the Tucson affiliate. You're looking at another 140 between them. Kingman's got 30. Williams 8. Sedona 14. Jerome 9. Coln did the addition in his head. He said, "That's 253. Reyes said, "Add Show Low and Globe, and the guys coming down from the Utah run. You're over 300. Coln said, "I want 400 minimum. This needs to mean something, or it doesn't mean anything." Reyes said, 400. Coln said, 400. Make the calls. Reyes made the calls starting at 2 in the afternoon. He worked from a contact list he kept on a flip phone he had used for club business since 2017, and he worked it with the methodical patience of a man who understood that the way you ask a thing determines whether it gets done. He called chapter leads, not members. He told each one what the situation was in 3 sentences or less. He did not say it was an order. He did not need to. By 6 that evening, the chapter leads had called their members, and by 8 that night, Reyes had callbacks confirming 381 riders. He called Coln. He said, 381. Coln said, "Keep going." By 10 o'clock, it was 417. Reyes texted Coln the number. Coln looked at it in the dark of his kitchen. He put the phone face down on the table. He said nothing to the empty room. 417 was enough. The plan was not complicated because complicated plans fail in cold weather. Reyes laid it out to the chapter leads on a conference call the following morning. Thursday, 7 a.m. Every rider stages at the Walmart parking lot on Milton Road, 3 blocks from the shoe store, and 4 from the transitional housing unit on Cedar. No riding in formation through residential streets at that hour. Riders park, walk, or take their own vehicles to the staging point. At 9 a.m., Garrett Coln walks to the Refuge North Transitional Housing Office alone and introduces himself to the program director. Not the whole club, just Coln, one man. The Refuge North director was a person named Miles Fett, and Deb Ochoa had already made a call to him to say that someone wanted to help and that the someone was trustworthy. Fett had said he was open to a conversation. He had not said he was open to 417 motorcyclists, which was why the conversation happened before the assembly. Reyes said, Coln talks to Fett, gets permission, and gives the signal. Signal is 3 short rings to my phone. I get those rings. I call the staging lot. One of the chapter leads said, What if Fett says no? Reyes said, Then we don't go to the housing unit. We find another way to get what those kids need, and we go through proper channels, and it takes longer, and we do it. There was a pause. The chapter lead said, Understood. It snowed Thursday morning. Not heavily, a thin gray sheet of it that started at 5 and coated the flats without accumulating into anything dramatic, but it was cold in the way that gets into thin jackets and old shoes, and Garrett Coln felt it when he started the Road King at 6:30 and pulled out of Ash Creek into the dark. He rode north on the 89 with the snow coming sideways at his visor and the desert floor white on both sides, and he did not think about what he was riding toward. He thought about a carburetor. He thought about the job list on the whiteboard in the chapter house. He thought about the 300-mile service on Reyes's bike that was overdue. He did not think about Verna Pease's daughter standing in her socks. He did not think about the receipt in the breast pocket of his cut. He had learned, over 54 years, that there are things you cannot think directly at because they will move. You have to approach them sideways, the way you approach a fire that might go out. The Walmart lot on Milton Road was already filling when Coln rolled past it at 7:15. He did not stop. He counted 11 bikes near the entrance and kept riding. He went to the Refuge North office on Cedar, a low tan building with a wooden sign painted in blue, and he parked on the street. He sat on the bike for a moment. The snow had thinned. The peaks were invisible behind cloud. He went inside. Miles Fett was 41, slight, with wire glasses and the particular economy of movement that belongs to people who manage crises for a living and have stopped wasting effort on things that don't matter. He shook Garrett Coln's hand and then held the handshake 1 beat past the normal point, looking at him the way a man looks at something he is trying to measure. Coln let him look. Fett said, Deb said you're the real thing. Coln said, Deb's generous. Fett said, she's accurate. He gestured to a chair across from his desk. Coln sat. He explained what he had seen in the shoe store. He explained what Reyes had learned. He did not exaggerate, and he did not editorialize. He said, I have riders in that parking lot on Milton. 417 as of last night. We want to take the family to a store today and make sure the kids have winter gear. The mother has what she needs to get through to spring, and whatever we can do for the housing situation without stepping on your work, we'll do. We're not here to make it look like something. We're here because a girl traded her shoes. Fett took his glasses off. He set them on the desk. He looked at Garrett Coln for a long moment. He said, Verna Pease is going to have to agree to this herself. Coln said, Of course. Fett said, She's private. She came in voluntarily. She's doing everything right, and she's proud. Coln said, So are we. Fett looked at him. He put his glasses back on. He picked up his desk phone. Fett reached Verna Pease at the diner on Route 66. The breakfast rush was on and she could only talk for 2 minutes, but he gave her the essential facts and then he put Garrett Coln on the line. Coln had not planned what to say. He said, "Ms. Pease, your daughter came into a shoe store on Tuesday with a plan. The plan worked. We just want to make sure it keeps working." There was a pause on the line. He could hear the sounds of the diner behind her, the clatter and steam of a short-order kitchen. She said, "Who are you people?" He said, "We're the Ash Creek Riders. We're a motorcycle club out of the high desert. We've got 417 of us in a parking lot 3 blocks from you right now." Another pause, she said, "For us?" He said, "For your kids. And for you, but only if you want it." The pause this time was longer. The kitchen sounds continued. He waited. She said, "I get off at 11. He said, "We'll be there." There was one obstacle. It arrived in the form of Verna Pease's building manager at Refuge North, a man named Gerald Stipe, who appeared at Fett's office at 8:30 in the morning with the particular energy of a person who has decided that what they are about to do is reasonable. Stipe was 63, thin-mouthed, with the careful politeness of someone who uses courtesy as a form of obstruction. He told Fett that he had concerns about the liability exposure of having several hundred motorcyclists on or near Refuge North property, that the organization's insurance carrier had specific language around organized gatherings, and that he would need to speak with the board before he could authorize any such gathering, regardless of the intent. He said it pleasantly. He said it looking at the wall rather than at Garrett Coln. Coln sat in his chair. He did not move. He let Fett handle it for a moment, and Fett handled it carefully, explaining that the gathering was not on Refuge North property, and that the organization's formal involvement was limited to a referral, not a sponsorship. Stipe said that even a referral constituted an implicit endorsement, and that the board needed to be consulted. He said this twice. Then Garrett Coln said, "Mr. Stipe." Stipe looked at him. Coln said, "We're not asking Refuge North to sponsor anything. We're asking you to step out of the way of a family that needs something today. Snow's falling outside. Kids have been in a car. Their mother is on a diner wage. If you've got a liability concern, take it to your board at noon. Right now, at 8:30 in the morning, the concern I'm asking you to have is a 6-year-old boy whose feet were cold at recess." Stipe looked at him for a long moment. He looked at his shoes. He said, "I'll be available by phone if Miles needs me." He left. Fett looked at Coln. He said nothing. He picked up his desk phone again and called Verna Pease's cell number directly. Verna Pease arrived at the Refuge North office at 11:17, having gotten off her shift 6 minutes early after explaining to her manager that she had something she needed to do. She was 31 years old, with dark circles under her eyes that were not the look of a person who slept badly occasionally, but the look of a person who had not slept properly in months. She was wearing a server's non-slip shoes and a winter coat that was too light for November. She was holding Tommy's hand. Tommy was 6, small for 6, with a wide face and a wool hat that had a small hole at the crown. He was wearing sneakers with a crack along the left sole. Isla was on Verna's other side, in her green jacket with the safety pin, watching Garrett Coln from the moment she walked in. Recognition did not move across her face like surprise. It moved like the confirmation of a thing she had been waiting on. She said, "You're the man from the shoe store." Coln said, "I am." She said, "I told Tommy you were going to do something." He looked at her. He said, "You were right." Tommy looked between them without comprehension. He said, "Are we going somewhere?" Isla said, "I think so." Verna Pease stood behind her children, with her hands on their shoulders, and looked at Garrett Coln and said, "I can't take a handout." He said, "I know." He said, "I'm asking you to take 417 people who want to do something decent before the snow gets worse." She looked at him a long time. She said, "Okay." she said it quietly. The way you give permission for something you have needed for a very long time and never let yourself ask for. They walked from the Refuge North office to the Milton Road staging lot, a 5-minute walk through the thin gray snowfall. Fett came with them. Reyes had gotten the 3 short rings at 11:10, and the lot had reorganized. The bikes were parked in concentric rows along the lot's north edge, 417 of them in lines that stretched further than the eye wanted to believe. The riders stood beside them or in small groups near their machines. When Verna Pease came around the corner of the building with her children and saw the lot, she stopped walking. She put a hand over her mouth. She said nothing. Tommy walked forward 3 steps ahead of her and stopped and looked at the rows of bikes with his mouth open. He said, "How many?" Reyes, who was standing at the near edge of the lot, crouched down to Tommy's level and said, 417. Tommy said, "That's a lot." Reyes said, "Yeah." Isla had come to stand beside Reyes. She looked at the rows for a moment. Then she looked at Garrett Cohn, who was standing a few feet back. She said, "I knew there was another move." He said, "There's always another move." What followed was organized by Reyes with the logistics of a man who had been planning it since Tuesday night in his head, well before the number was confirmed, because Reyes operated on the assumption that things would be done and spent no time imagining that they wouldn't. The Ash Creek riders did not arrive at a big box store as a crowd. They arrived in careful rotating waves, 100 at a time, so that the store's regular operations were not paralyzed, and each wave had a designated member who functioned as a coordinator with the store manager, a woman named Patrice Huang, who had been briefed by phone that morning by one of the club's Phoenix affiliate contacts. Patrice Huang had initially been wary, which was reasonable. By 10:30, she had assigned 2 of her staff as dedicated escorts for the effort, which was not something she had been asked to do. She did it because she had watched the first 100 riders walk in and hold every door for every other customer and address her staff by name from their name tags and say thank you in the way people say thank you when they mean it. She did it because when she had explained to the first wave's coordinator that she had a concern about foot traffic in the kids section, the coordinator had reorganized the wave flow in 6 minutes to route around it. She did it because competence, when you are accustomed to managing chaos, is its own form of courtesy. Isla and Tommy Pease walked the store with their mother and Garrett Cohn, who functioned not as a tour guide, but as a man who carried things, which is what he was built for. He did not suggest. He did not make decisions. He walked behind them, and when Verna Pease paused in front of something and looked at the price and set it back on the shelf, he picked it up and put it in the cart. She turned around once and said, "I need you to stop doing that." He said, "I'll stop when you're warm." She looked at him for a moment. She did not tell him to stop again. Tommy stopped in front of a pair of gray snow boots and looked at them for a long time without touching them. He did not ask for them. He looked at them the way a 6-year-old looks at something when he has already been taught that looking is free, but asking costs something. Cohn reached past him and took them off the shelf. He said, "What size?" Tommy said, "I don't know." Cohn sat down on the low bench in the aisle and took Tommy's left shoe off and looked at the size on the tag inside. He put it back on. He found the boots in a size 5 and set them in the cart. Tommy watched this with large eyes. He said nothing. He put his hand on the side of the cart and walked with it after that, and he did not let go of it. Isla had gone quiet. She walked with her arms at her sides, watching the riders who moved through the store around them. She stopped once in the coat aisle and held a dark red coat up to her body, checking the length. It was the right length. She put it back and moved on. Cohn had seen it. He went back and put the coat in the cart. Isla turned around when she heard the sound of it landing. She looked at the coat in the cart. She looked at Cohn. She said, "The zipper on mine still works if I use a safety pin." He said, "I know." She said, "That's not why I looked at it." He said, "No." She said, I just wanted to know what it looked like on. He said, now you can know what it feels like on. She held his gaze for a moment, and the look on her face was not gratitude, not yet. It was a kind of reckoning, the look of a person who has been carrying something heavy and has just been asked whether she'd like to set it down. She put the red coat on over her green jacket. She kept it on for the rest of the morning. The total that day came to $4,312 across 3 cartloads and 2 separate transactions, because Patrice Huang, on her own authority, applied a store discount code that reduced the total by $800, a discount she told no one about until the receipt printed. The riders contributed cash in amounts that ranged from $10 to $300, passed forward through the waves in envelopes that Reyes collected at the door. Nobody counted it in front of Verna Pease. It was not her money to feel ashamed of. It was the club's gift to give, and they gave it without theater. Verna Pease stood at the register and watched her children hold their bags and said, I don't know how to thank 400 people. The cashier, who had been working the register for 3 hours, surrounded by riders who had been patient and gentle and had called her ma'am, looked up from the terminal and said, I think they know. Verna Pease put her hand flat on the counter. She breathed. She did not cry in the store, which took everything she had. She cried in the parking lot, briefly, with her back turned to the rows of bikes, her children's bags set at her feet, and Garrett Cohn standing 20 feet away, with his hands in his pockets not looking at her, because he understood that some moments need space around them and not a witness. There was one more thing he had not planned. He had not planned the moment when Tommy Pease, standing in the parking lot in his new gray snow boots, walked across the asphalt to where Garrett Cohn was standing, and stopped in front of him and looked up. Tommy was 6 years old and Cohn was 54, and the distance between their eyes was approximately 4 feet. Tommy said, Do you have kids? Cohn looked at him. He said nothing for a moment. He said, I had a daughter. Tommy said, What happened? Cohn said, She got sick. A long time ago. She was 8. Tommy looked at him. He said, Like Isla. Cohn said, Like Isla. Tommy was quiet for a moment, processing this the way children process large things, directly, without the detours that adults build. He said, Is that why you bought Isla's shoes? Garrett Cohn looked at the boy for a long time. He said, Yeah. Tommy reached out and took Cohn's hand, just took it, with his 6-year-old hand inside Cohn's scarred and calloused one, and stood there, and did not say anything else. And Garrett Cohn, who had not cried at a funeral or a gavel vote or a hospital room in more years than he could count, stood in a snowy parking lot in Flagstaff and felt something in his sternum give way, the way old ice gives way in a warm February, not with violence but with a low, exhausted settling, a sound you feel before you hear it. He did not cry. He was close. He was the closest he had been to that particular edge in a very long time, and he stood there with a small boy's hand in his, and let himself be that close, without stepping back from it, which was the bravest thing he had done in a decade. 7 months later, the Ash Creek Riders held their first annual Boots and Coats run out of the Flagstaff staging lot on Milton Road. 462 riders that year. The previous year's total was stitched into the underside of the club banner as an amendment, 417. Both numbers mattered. Reyes ran the logistics. Patrice Huang at the store applied the same discount code she had applied the first time and told no one about it again. Verna Pease had by then moved into a 2-bedroom unit through a housing assistance program that Deb Ochoa had helped her qualify for in January. She was working a full-time position at a hotel on Route 66 that included benefits. Tommy had finished his first-grade year without missing a day of school. Isla, who had turned 9 in March, had written a letter to the Ash Creek Riders chapter house that Reyes had read aloud at a Thursday night meeting. The letter was 4 sentences. It said, I am writing to thank you for the boots and the coats. My brother says the gray boots are his favorite things he owns. I still have the red coat. I want you to know that I knew someone would come. Reyes finished reading and set the letter on the table. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then one of the newer members in the back said, "She knew before he even walked past the window." Reyes folded the letter. He said, "She put those shoes on that shelf like a flag." The room was quiet in the way rooms go quiet when everyone in them is thinking the same true thing. The letter was framed and hung on the wall of the chapter house between a photograph of the first boots and coats run, 417 machines in the flat gray morning light, and a second photograph taken later that day of Tommy Pease in his snow boots, standing next to Garrett Cohn's Road King, with one hand on the chrome and one hand held up to the camera. In the photograph, Isla is standing just behind Tommy, wearing her red coat. She is not looking at the camera. She is looking at something out of frame, the same direction she was looking when she stood in her socks on that linoleum floor, patient and certain, waiting for the world to make its next move. Miles Fett visited the chapter house in July and stood in front of the photographs for a long time. He said, "You know what I keep thinking about?" Cohn said, "What?" Fett said, "She didn't ask anyone for anything. She just put the shoes on the shelf and stood there." Cohn said, "No," he said, "she made a trade. She gave something up so her brother could have something. She just needed someone to make it a fair trade." Fett looked at the photograph. He said, "And you were that someone." Cohn picked up his coffee. He said, 417 of us were. The annual run has been held every November since. The numbers keep changing. The number that doesn't change is 417, sewn into the back of every banner, printed at the bottom of every flyer, stated at the end of every chapter president's remarks before the riders mount up. Not because it was the largest number, because it was the first. Because somewhere in the first cold hour of that first Thursday, a man with a bad knee and a scarred face and a receipt folded against his heart knelt on a linoleum floor and asked a simple question and heard an answer that cracked something open in him that had been sealed since he lost his daughter. You think you know what a motorcycle club is. You think you know what it means when 400 of them fill a parking lot. You think you know what the thunder of all those engines is made of, what it means, what it says about the men who ride. But the thunder that morning on Milton Road was not what you think it was. It was 417 people answering a girl who had traded her shoes and stood in her socks on a cold floor and believed, with the total unreasonable certainty of an 8-year-old who has decided the world still has one more move left, that someone was going to come, and the sound of all those engines starting at once was not a warning. It was the answer. It was the sound of the world keeping its word.